Hola clase, ¿cómo están ustedes? I'm doing these brief interviews to kind of help supplement or add to what you're reading in the textbook and the modules and what you're practicing in the mind tap activities. This is focusing on the Leccio'n Preliminar, that brief section that's right before chapter 1. They simply start us out by introducing 4 basic questions, right? And so if you look at the page numbers that I've listed here, you can see where they're introducing these questions to try to get us to communicate and talk a little early in our studies in the lesson. So the first question that they introduce is the student kind of greeting the other student, Hola, ¿cómo te llamas? Hola, ¿cómo te llamas? Of course, they're trying to show us how we would exchange names. So the hola, of course, is how you would say hello or hi. Notice that the H is silent. It doesn't make a sound there, hola. The ¿cómo te llamas? This question literally is asking, how do you call yourself? How are you called, right? So to respond to that, you notice that the student says, me llamo, and his name happens to be Nico, right? And so he gives his own name. However, there are other options as ways that you can respond to that question. Me llamo is I am called, and that will be followed by your name. We could also use just the word soy, meaning I am. ¿Cómo te llamas? Soy profesor Jasso. ¿Cómo te llamas? Me llamo profesor Jasso. So either of those could work. There's even another option if you like English. Mi nombre es. My name is. So you have some options here as to how you can respond to that question. On your flip grid videos, I kind of encouraged you to use soy. I believe is what I asked you to use, right, to introduce yourself. But any of these could work. Me llamo, soy, mi nombre es. Lots of different Spanish speakers have different sounds when you see that double L. A part of the Leccio'n Preliminar focuses on the alphabet. I believe that's coming in on page 3 in your books, because the sounds that Spanish words produce is very closely tied to the letters of the alphabet in Spanish. Okay? So, ¿cómo te llamas? Me llamo, then your name. Or soy, then your name. Or mi nombre es, and then your name. A follow-up question that they introduce on page 3 then is, after you've exchanged names, is ¿cómo se escribe? How is it written? This is where you would use the alphabet to spell your name, right? And so they demonstrate with the guy's name, Nico, se escribe. Then he gives the letters N-I-C-O. You can practice using the letters that you see listed on page 3 to spell your own name or to spell a word you're familiar with. Se escribe N-I-C-O. N-I-C-O. So the names of the letters you see listed on page 3 are really the names of the letters of the alphabet, but you would only use those when you really want to know how something is spelled or how something is written. And that's that question, ¿cómo se escribe? All right? Then they progress on to page 4 to kind of demonstrate how you would ask someone, how are you doing or how are you feeling? So they introduce the questions, ¿cómo estás? With the picture on the left, but they also introduce a little more formal way to ask that question, ¿cómo está usted? So we're going to note that this word usted is always going to be used to imply a little more formality, right? So the distinction between formal and informal is a form of address to whom you're speaking. You're informal with friends, people you know really well, people you're on a first name basis with, people that are younger than you are, pets. Those are the kinds of informal forms of address we use. The formal form would be used more for strangers, people you don't know really well, people whose names carry a title like Mr., Mrs., Doctor, Professor, and those titles are also introduced to you there on page 4. So those would be the distinctions between, am I using the informal form of address with the person, or am I being a little more formal, right? And there's a couple of activities in between these presentations in the book that you kind of can go through to see. They're giving you chances to practice. With whom would you be formal? With whom would you be informal? Right? ¿Cómo estás? How are you? ¿Cómo está usted? How are you? Then a few sample ways to respond to that would be bien, if you're doing well. Muy bien, if you're doing very well. Mal, if you're not doing so well, you're doing badly. Así, así, so, right? There's a few other ways when we actually learn the verb estar that we're going to look at how would you respond to that. Okay? They also introduce at that point how you turn a question back around to someone. So as a follow-up to ¿Cómo te llamas? Once you respond, me llamo Profesor Hasso. ¿Y tú? So that ¿y tú just means and you, right? A way to turn that question right back around to whom you're speaking. Or ¿y usted? And you, in a little more formal way, right? So that can be used in between these questions when you're trying to have an exchange with someone else. They also introduced the names of the classes for you on page 5, right? And then, of course, on page 6, you get a chance to use those to ask someone, what classes do you have? ¿Qué clases tienes? What classes do you have? Words like clases or lección, or even for some of you, preliminar. Those words look like words that you might already be familiar with in English. Lesson, preliminary, classes, right? So those words we call cognates. As you go through any of your lessons, where we're in Spanish 109, try to let your eyes gravitate towards things that look familiar to you, that you recognize already in English. That's going to increase your word recognition capabilities in a foreign language. It's also going to help you to increase your Spanish vocabulary when you look at the patterns that words follow. So try to look for those. What classes do you have? And then they show responses for that usually begin with tengo, I have, and then you name classes. What classes do you think these are? Tengo historia, música, arte, y química. So if you're using your word clues and your cognate recognition, you might say, hey, that looks like history. That pretty much looks like music. I know that that's going to be art class. What class do you think química might be? Química, when you look at those, when you look at the writing, but even look at how it sounds, química. What class starts that same way? Chemistry, right? Okay, so this is just a brief summary of the Leccio'n Preliminar, and I hope this video helps you to understand that they're just trying to get us to communicate early with 4 basic questions. Of course, this one, how is it written? We're not really using that a whole lot because we're focusing on being able to exchange, have an exchange with someone where we can exchange names, exchange how you're doing, and talk briefly about what classes you have. Okay? All right, so this is the Leccio'n Preliminar video. Hope it helps.